All right. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Association Chat. It's a very special episode because it was pretty much came together last minute. But it's such a good example of how you can actually use technology for good. Right.
Right.
And not for evil. Today with me, I have Amy Sample Ward. And Amy, you are the CEO of NTEN. And just let everyone know a little bit about what NTEN is. And then we can move into why you're talking with us today.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for having me. If there was ever an example of an emergent campaign, this is certainly it, right?
Truly.
So NTEN, we're a nonprofit ourselves, and our mission is to make sure that all other nonprofits know how to use technology strategically so that they can meet their missions and meet community needs. We're a capacity builder of other nonprofits. And relevant to today's conversation, one of our core beliefs is that the internet is a powerful and necessary tool for all of us, and that it's vital, it's affordable and accessible to all people around the world.
Well, and that's actually a perfect introduction into why we're talking today, because there's been some news on this front. The .org top level domain, which I didn't even know what that meant. What a top level domain.
I mean, so many people don't know. So many people in the last week have learned so many new acronyms.
Really, truly. And for the association world, we already thought that we had that on lockdown, right? But no, turns out we didn't. And so let's talk about why we're meeting today with this whole .org debacle. This has happened really fast. It seems like it's happened really fast. And there are lots of moving pieces. So why don't you give us in a nutshell, like what happened? What just happened in the past 10 days? Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if you follow Bitch Media. They do this really great "What Just Happened" email that I think, I don't know that this is necessarily a topic they would focus on, but we definitely know what just happened email recap. Mm-hmm. So there's essentially two things happening concurrently, and I want to give you fair opportunity. If I go down into like inside baseball, just say pause and we can describe things. Okay.
Yeah, so let's do that.
There's two things concurrently happening right now. One that started months ago was the .org contract. So the contract that says this is how Public Interest Registry and Internet Society can manage the .org top level domain that most of us all use, right? Mm-hmm. And that's been a contract that they have held since almost 20 years. 2002 was that conversation. So in this contract, there were a few things that happened similar to what's happening right now. Process was skipped / ignored. And there have been a number of organizations. Usually when there's something that ICANN is doing, there's hundreds of folks who respond. When they were proposing these new rules for managing the .org contract, over 3,000 folks responded. So clearly, folks had some issues, right? The pieces that were happening there that were really creating risk and fear for the nonprofit community were vulnerabilities for pricing and for censorship. So pricing, it lifted the price caps, whereas, I want to make sure in this conversation, even though you and I are here in the United States, that we don't have a conversation that focuses on the US and Canada nonprofit sector, budget sizes, organizational privileges, because this is a domain and a nonprofit sector we're talking about of the whole world.
Right.
And so price caps, sure, maybe a US organization could pay $1 more. In Tanzania, where there are many nonprofits and the fastest growing, world for this, the average income is $2 a day. So are we talking that folks would need to be paying like multiple weeks of revenue to have organization that is trusted across the web, that's really unreasonable. So
Right.
the risk and vulnerability of losing those price caps was one big area of focus. The other was, like I said, on opportunities for censorship. And it's not, of course, written into the contract that everyone can then just decide who gets to have a domain or something really obvious like that. But something that I think many folks that listen to Association Chat will know about is like on Facebook, for example, where someone can like report your page and say that you're doing something bad. And then, oh my gosh, now our page is gone.
Right.
Think about that process working as your website through the person who owns your domain, right? Who you bought it from.
Yes.
Now, I think organizations thinking about how we've already seen plenty of examples, whether it's in other countries where government agencies want progressive nonprofits to be shut down, or it's activists that are trying to do whatever, right? Mm-hmm. We've already seen how that works in tools like Facebook. So if that now exists as a potential, vulnerability for their entire web presence, what does that mean for nonprofits working, especially in regions of the world that need their services?
Right. And, some of the things that some people I've been talking with have been bringing up are, what about renewals? What about, right. A lot of .orgs have been building their brand, putting out right. marketing. It's not a simple thing to just change your right. domain. Like if you needed to change that and try to avoid this situation, it's kind of an issue if all of this time you've been building up content, hopefully right. building up trust and bookmarks to your site. And then suddenly you don't know what it's going to cost when you go to renew. You don't
right.
know.
Right. And I want to come back to that. And mm-hmm. I want to name the other piece of what's happening. So we've had for months now, this renegotiation of the contract with these vulnerabilities in there.
Yeah.
Then it was announced that the Internet Society was going to sell public interest registry and the yes. .org contract to a private equity firm that was just created and has no track record. So that then, speaking of trust, now we're talking about what does it mean to have the contract that governs how we may have access to this .org top-level domain owned by a private equity firm that I would argue there's no way the default assumption is that a private equity firm has nonprofits at heart. Right.
Right. And there is a question that I got in. There is a lot of chatter online about this. And I don't know if you can answer anything about this, but can you go into, do you know anything about the background of the owners of the investment company, that private equity firm that is trying?
Right. The right. investors of Ethos.
Right.
That's a question I think a lot of us have been asking. And there have been various folks with different connections to Internet Society sharing what they have learned or heard or can piece together. So there are some articles out there. I'm happy to make sure those get connected into the show notes.
Yep.
And also recognizing this is super emergent, like information is being shared as we're talking right now. But I would reinforce that I think finding out who those investors are is really important, since the news so far has pointed to a limited number of investors and all of them having political and potentially GOP ties. So not necessarily a diverse group or a group that would otherwise have grassroots nonprofits, especially global grassroots nonprofits, at heart in decision-making they would have. And at the end of the day, there's a difference between being a sustainable, thriving nonprofit, right? We all can understand, we've all been in that board meeting and talking about what that means, versus an organization whose goal is to maximize revenue.
Yeah.
Right. I would love to say that every nonprofit at the end of every fiscal year should be able to put some money into their reserves, right? That's healthy financial stewardship. That is not what I believe would happen if a private equity firm is owning this organization, right?
Right.
So I don't know how, to go back to your trust piece, I don't know how there can be trust from the sector right now when both the process of all of this, of both of these pieces, right, the contract and the sale, have not followed real process, have not been transparent in any way. And now, even once the community is clearly responding, I mean, we have, well over 8,000 people who have signed on to the letter.
Right.
There's still nothing coming out to provide that trust.
Well,
right?
and there's that many people, but we all know how many people actually would be signing and saying, "Oh my gosh, yeah, we can't let this happen." But
if they knew about it.
If they knew about it. So one issue is that this is fast moving, and if we don't do something now, it's just so quickly things can, things can go wildly wrong. But in addition to that, it's not the easiest thing to explain to people why they should care. And in fact, I'd say when I saw that Gizmodo article that went out, I shared something on my personal Facebook page about it. And someone who's involved in technology wrote and said, "Why does it matter? Why does that even matter?" And to a lot of people, they don't see why they should care about this and the impact it will have. And I think for a lot of association executives, I would say that probably the majority still don't really know that this needs to be on their radar.
Right. I think, one way that's separate from the values-based piece of all of this, if we want to just talk shop and talk about your budget as an organization, if you did not have the .org domain anymore, what's the risk, right? You have reputational risk. You no longer are using a website that is common knowledge related to the nonprofit sector, right? Having something that ends in .org. So you've got some reputational risk. Like, think about sending out a fundraising appeal to a website that ended in .com.
Right. How do you know?
Right? From a consumer side, we have never created a culture in the US or Canada or anywhere that some other website is where you would give your money, right? So there's that piece right there, like instant reputation gone. Then say you want to change. Okay, so that's essentially like a rebrand. Okay, every print material is gone. Every online entity that you have needs to be updated. The staff time, the physical material costs, all of that is a huge lift for an organization. Even a giant organization that has a whole department that could do it, that's months of work. So the idea that it doesn't matter or, would be easy to change and adapt to, I just don't buy that, especially when we think about the number of organizations, in the US, for example, that are under $500,000 a year. They literally don't have budget to change those things, right?
Well, yeah. And can we talk a little bit about, like, going back to the trust piece? It actually, shouldn't we care more? One of the things I keep looking at about this whole story is that, we didn't have to think about where the .org was managed or anything like that before. But now that we are, this trust issue for nonprofits, this trust issue that we face all the time, if we're supposed to decrease the barrier of entry, if we're supposed to increase our visibility, if we're supposed to help to develop trust in our organizations, and that's a big piece of why people belong, why they engage, why they give, then shouldn't we actually have some sort of verification process? Shouldn't we actually have something in place where we can say, yes, you can trust in this entity?
Right, exactly. And I think a part of that trust, of course, when PIR was first created, they were benefiting from the trust of the Internet Society. But over time, I think PIR has built trust in the community, especially a more global nonprofit community. And the millions of dollars that they earned every year, they reinvested in the community. They provided capacity building and training and tools and online resources to help organizations not just build a website using .org, but to use the internet for their missions, right? And the idea that all of that would somehow continue, I find really doubtful, right?
Yeah.
If they're now reporting to a private equity firm, that's a profit margin that they should be passing through, right? Not reinvesting millions of dollars to train small nonprofits on how to use the web. So I think that's both a trust piece and a direct impact we're going to feel as a sector, that there are fewer resources now. Right.
So now you have save.org that's out there that, by the way, I have a call to action on this, and I know that this is for a limited group right now, but if you're listening to this later, or if you're watching this on the replay later, know that you can go to save.org.org. You can go to save.org.org, and you can add your name to the list. You can go,
and you can also add your organization.
Right.
So we're right now, of course, we're live for some people, but it'll be recorded for others. We're over 8,300 people already, which I would say, since this only went up on Friday, is a really clear indication that the community is paying attention and does not support this.
Can we talk a little bit about tell me about NTEN getting involved and creating the letter and where we are now. So you drafted and wrote this letter, you have people signing on. Walk me through how that all came to be and where things stand now.
Sure. So the first message I received, like others who are members of Internet Society, so because I'm getting to talk to folks who know so much about what being a member means and all the different definitions of it, I want to go a little deeper. So Internet Society is a membership organization. If you're an individual, there's no cost. You're just creating an account and a profile. And if you're an organization and you say you're Google and you want to be associated with them, then you pay, right? So I encourage folks who want to be deeper in this conversation to go become an individual free member and join these listservs and start being vocal, because people really are. So the first message I got as a member of ISOC was a message from Andrew Sullivan that said, "We're going to be announcing this later today. It's so great. I know everyone will be so happy." And then a couple hours later, ta-da, it's public, here it is. So my response to that was like picking my jaw up off of my desk, while I'm reading my email.
No.
Yes. And connecting with a friend and colleague at EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, who I always trust and look to on every internet governance issue. And it turns out they had the same reaction. And so we said, okay, let's make a public letter and see how many folks we can get on. So we divided up the duties, and they were going to work on the actual letter while I worked on rallying some supporters. And that was on the Friday before. So we kind of went from 1 week start to campaign page. And we actually didn't anticipate the campaign page at first. We just thought we would send a public letter and then, with the co-signers on it. But as I got closer and closer, I couldn't let go of the feeling that, and also my background in campaigning was like, this has to have a call to action, and we have to mobilize the community, because there's no way that these 27 organizations, and the fact that 27 organizations signed on in like 3 days. Yeah. Clearly more people are going to want to be a part of this, and we should create an opportunity for that. So at first, when we launched the site, we enabled folks to email ISOC and ICANN and PIR directly, which flooded them with emails. We honestly didn't anticipate that so many people would do it, So we launched that on Friday, and Monday, yesterday, we pivoted instead of continuing to send the emails, because clearly they were hearing it. They were posting about the campaign. The staff at PIR and Internet Society were referencing it. They were putting out the very fun talking points that they have put out. So clearly they were getting that message, and we changed it to an embedded petition where people can just add their name and endorse it. And so we can keep the numbers going, but we don't have to continue to send the emails. So I think we switched over from direct email to petition when it was at 7,300 emails that had been sent in, about 3 days.
Wow. That is unbelievable. And things are fast moving. In fact, you were telling me, is it okay? Like after this discussion that you're having conversations, and who knows what happens with that.
Right. I mean, that's really what I think is so challenging about the situation right now, is that, of course, so many folks are very fired up. Folks within the Internet Society community and member groups, et cetera, are all calling for public conversations. We have certainly been wanting there to be discussion in the open. We have the opportunity to have a conversation with the folks from Ethos and PIR and Internet Society shortly after this call. And I'm honestly a little unsure of what will really be shared there. I think they have been actively putting out statements since yesterday, and none of those statements have anything new in them. So I'm going to be asking them for something new, and hoping that they will really share that, and that we can turn this into, NTEN and National Council of Nonprofits and EFF will be on the call together saying, we're not here for a private conversation. We are here representing our constituents that represent the whole sector, and this needs to be a public conversation. I don't know, again, how that will land on them, right? So, but it's just an indication of how, we launched the site on Friday. It's Tuesday. We're having this call. It is extremely emergent. And what that means from a mobilization perspective is also challenging, because the folks, once they sign and are fired up and ready to go, we actually don't know what to tell them to do, because we're not even sure what's about to happen.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. I guess it depends on what you hear on this next call. Right. And what happens, what ICANN does, and but what would be the ideal? Because at this point, even if they said, you know what, this was maybe misguided. At this point, now it's raised up this question of how should things be? How should things be set up?
Right. So I think if we were making our demand letter, the demand letter starts with hard stop right now on this sale, right?
Yeah.
And then an investigation into what is really needed. It's hard for me to find evidence that something is broken and this is a solution to it, right? So this has created all kinds of distrust in Internet Society's process and decision-making as a whole, regardless of just this one decision, right? So investigation into that process, policy pieces, is the organization needing something here? And if they are, after an investigation confirms that's transparent and, responsible to the community, what does a process look like to create a solution there, right?
Right.
Especially when, the public statements that Andrew's made is that they were approached with this proposal. So if you were approached, then it clearly wasn't a problem you were looking for a solution to, right?
Yes. And I wonder, and this comes into play with the question that I see that Glenn's asking over on the side. Is it true that some of the buyers were on the board of the sellers? So, it is a little bit strange that there's this, seemingly there's this attempt to sort of distance oneself from needing anything and going out and actually asking for this deal to come to Andrew, but they took it. They did it.
Glenn, you are asking the right questions, and they are questions that I think a lot of us are trying to get some sunlight on.
Right. Right. I mean, that's one thing that I've seen on some of the different listservs and out
Hmm.
there, where there are a lot of there's there's some private investigation that's going on out there, and it's really fascinating, but also a little frightening, because especially
Right.
for I see a lot of people posting about the international aspect of it. you
Yep.
know why is all of this being decided here by these people
Right.
when it has such a global impact?
Exactly. And I think that really reinforces the process piece,
Hmm.
that there's no way a decision like this could have been reached in that short amount of time if it truly had diverse stakeholders at the table, right?
Yeah.
So I just, it's of course always the trap that folks in the US are US centric and like can't imagine that the whole rest of the world exists. Internet Society has chapters all over the world.
Yeah.
And the first chapter that I've seen is the chapter from the Netherlands. And they posted this morning that as a chapter, they are standing in opposition and they're urging other chapters to join. And I think that's really powerful. It's
Hmm.
not, random people on the internet like me, right? It is their own chapter structure is in opposition to this. And not just like a US chapter, these chapters from other parts of the world who should have been part of this. And I think that's really powerful. And I'm excited that folks know speaking up right now is important.
Oh,
And
yeah.
versus, other kinds of deals that we might read about in the New York Times or something, where people are like, this horrible thing has happened and they're shining the light on it, but there's nothing for me to do. There is
There's
something
something
to
to
do,
do.
right? We
Right.
can stop this. And I can, and the board have the option to stop it. So continuing that pressure is really important from our perspective.
Well, on that front, what would you have association executives, association leaders who are listening to this right now um, do on their side? I mean, sure, they can sign and say that they support,
Yeah.
and they can sign up their organizations, but are there other things that they can do that can help get the word out and can help to make this a more powerful message for folks?
Yeah, I think that one piece that they can do is help translate the what does this mean for us message into the niche of each world that we all work in. Whether that's to other nonprofits and helping them understand the impacts this could have on their work, but also to the general public, right? So that other
Mhm.
people understand, oh, right, I probably wouldn't donate to you if you had some random new website, right? Or how would I actually know it was you? So being vocal, not only through the save.org website, but on your own website, put out a statement. I'm happy to help you with that language. We will give you language to use, whatever you need, but helping to share that is one piece. The other piece is if you, as a person, want to go to the Internet Society website and sign up, again, totally free, just create a profile and join those online groups and start to say, oh, actually, Sierra Club here, YMCA here, Girl Scouts of America here. We hear you and see you, and this is not okay, so that they are not in a position to say, oh, it's always the same old people that complain, right? The
Mhm.
more new voices are in there, the harder that kind of statement is.
Right. On that front, what are you looking to do next? I mean, I'm sure you're reaching out to different large associations, their leaders, to say, "Hey, support me on this. Sign on." So
Yeah.
what's next?
Yeah. What is next? Well, I've got a few important phone calls today, and we'll be sussing out what makes sense logically the next step. Also, as I mentioned before, working and talking to the existing chapter leadership structure inside of the Internet Society to support folks having their own message and saying what they want to say. I don't believe that everybody has to go through the campaign website or
Mhm.
even know about the campaign. But if folks feel supported and resourced to stand up, I want them standing up. So that's our immediate next step. And then from there, potentially mobilizing the folks who've already signed, the 8,000 and growing, for whatever next action happens. So definitely hoping that folks continue, and every time you refresh the site, the ticker's gone up, so
yeah, right.
continuing to have people sign up there so that we can follow up with them and provide them with other actions that will be meaningful, and not only, additional petitions. I mean, we likely won't have anything else in that way. It'll only be forward movement, because we know they see the numbers, and we just want to keep putting real actions in front of people now.
So, and the timing is a little bit unfortunate, because we're going into Thanksgiving in the US, and it's like, we're gathering this momentum, and then now a family holiday when everyone's traveling. Right. What?
Right. But again, keeping in mind that this is a holiday weekend in the US, but not the whole rest of the world is going to keep moving, and making sure that those chapter leaders and other organizations working in opposition to the sale feel resourced and ready to keep that going over the weekend is important to me.
So what about the media? Has there been much interest in the media? What's happening with that?
It's interesting. There's definitely been some interest. I mean, there has been coverage out there. I think reporters that I'm talking to, the piece I really have to stress is how timely this is. Yeah. That, they're like, oh, well, I'm thinking about an article, maybe in the coming weeks. And like,
oh no,
I don't even know what to tell you about 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think that goes back to the piece we talked about at the very start of the show, that it feels so sudden and like a topic no one had talked about before, that the idea that it could be timely is really difficult, because like, wait, I need to learn about this first.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's the piece I'm stressing with reporters, but they're also very interested in, what does this really look like if it all goes through, and how do we know it will be bad? And I really want to flip that around and say, how would we ever trust that this would be good? Right. I think the burden of proof needs to be that there's any reassurance here, not the burden of proof on me that somehow this is potentially bad. Obviously, it's potentially bad.
It's very obviously potentially bad. And the fact that there is a lack of transparency on even the formation of the group that is trying to make this purchase.
Right.
That, I mean, how can you say that transparency is going to be there on any other front if we can't even trust in the purchaser, right?
Right. And we don't even really know who the purchaser
we don't. Yeah, I know. It's a very, very shady piece of business. And unfortunately, all of these wonderful nonprofits and .orgs are caught in the middle of it. Glenn says, do we have legal expertise looking at whether the behavior of the selling board may be a violation of the duty of loyalty?
I think, Glenn, if you have access to some pro bono legal services that you would like to send NTEN's way, I'm happy to receive them. I think it is fair to trust that other organizations that have been, especially working on the .org contract renegotiation, like EFF, who have legal expertise in-house, are on whatever case they can be on. But I'm not really able to speak about any of the legal conversations.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I think that the big complication I've seen in trying to get information out to the association community about it is that people don't seem to understand that sense of urgency, the fact that this is timely, that this is something that we need to act on now. Yeah. And that they should be more concerned. People should be more concerned about this, because every association, every nonprofit will be impacted by how this turns out.
Right.
So,
yes. And impacted even if they don't pay attention now. Right. And I think there's a piece that's like, well, if you really want to get into it, maybe you'll understand the details. You could know zero of the details. It will still impact your organization. And that means there's no time like now to start learning about what's going to happen.
Right. And I think, it is something that, as we said before, it is something that now that we know more about it, once you know more about it, the questions about how can we use that, how can we use
Right.
something like a domain to increase the level of trust for
Right.
for the nonprofit sector. One thing I was surprised to discover in this is that there wasn't any kind of verification process. And I realized, yeah, I know some for-profits that have used .org before, and but I hadn't really, and it had come up.
Well, so, it's interesting that you talk about the verification. So with that in mind, at the last time that top level domains were able to be suggested and approved by ICANN, .ngo and the like French version .ong were approved, and PIR also owns those.
So big. That's a big problem.
Right.
Right.
Right. So they are managing all three of those domains. Of course, the .ngo and .ong are outside of the .org contract.
Right.
But the relationship of a nonprofit managing those nonprofit domains is still very much at heart here.
Well, and that also that actually makes it even more interesting of a situation, because why would they do this for one? I mean, it has to make everyone else, it has to make the .ngo folks very nervous, and the .ong folks very nervous too.
Right.
Oh, so exciting.
Yes, for all of that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I want to check back with you and find out what happens.
I will keep you posted, and we can hop back on the line if it makes sense, or just share an update that you can put in show notes or anything else.
Yeah. And everyone who's listening to this, I just want to encourage you that, yes, sign your name, but first get informed, find out more about what this is and why it matters, and then tell everybody else, because it's very difficult to explain quickly. So, maybe hearing it from you will mean something to the next person. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to everyone else.
So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep asking questions to learn every day. As Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. All right. On that note, have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. Bye.